Hey guys, Ryan here. And today, video I was not expecting I was going to end up making, especially after hearing a few weeks ago that Ally Financial had re-signed with the 48 team. But out of nowhere, out of seemingly nowhere, Jimmie Johnson has decided that it's his time. He's hanging up the fire suit at the end of next year. So he's going to finish out his Hendrick Motorsports contract. So Hendrick has until basically November of next year, or I guess technically February of 2021 to really make a decision on who's going to fill that seat. I think they probably should make the decision a little sooner than February of next year, or 2 years from now, but yeah. But in this episode I'm going to talk about Jimmie Johnson and his legacy, as well as potential drivers that could replace him, and the potential upsides and downsides from those different ones. And just note that anything I say will have a bit of personal bias behind it, because I do like and dislike some of the drivers that are going to be involved in my discussion today. But I will try and be as objective as possible. So hopefully you guys can also be voice your opinions, of course, in the comment section down below. So let's get right into it. So let's start with the most obvious of all, Jimmie Johnson and his retirement. He came into the series rookie 2002, had only one Busch Series win in his entire career in that, and I think that actually came after going to the Cup Series. So was fairly mediocre in the Xfinity Series, and then came to Cup and absolutely started to light the series on fire, despite missing the Rookie of the Year honors in 2002. Ryan Newman was able to claim those honors, but I mean, he will be known, though, for years and years and years in the future as one of the greatest to ever drive a NASCAR stock car, for some of the accomplishments that he's done in just the last decade and a half. I mean, think about it. 5 championships in a row. I don't think we will ever see that repeated. Of course, partially due to the fact that the format is a very hard one to repeat in, yet it was also a similar format back then, not the knockout round style that we have now, but it was a very hard and changing format, and he was able to adapt to it and won 7 championships across, I think, 4 different playoff formats, including the current format that we have, and then like 3 other iterations of the previous format. So, I mean, Jimmie Johnson, he definitely figured out this era and basically built an era all his own. Just like what Dale Sr. did in the 80s and 90s. Just like what Richard Petty did way back when he was racing and got his Daytona 500s and championships. And I'm not going to try and compare, where does Jimmie Johnson rank on the, scale of greatest of all time. First off, of course, is next season he could win 36 races out of nowhere, win a championship, and then he'd be ahead of Gordon in wins. I think he might even pass David Pearson if he does that. He'd also take over the sole top spot for number of wins all time, or not number of wins all time, but number of championships all time, from the current tie between himself, Dale Sr., and Richard Petty. But let's be realistic. I don't think any of that's likely, but I'm not going to get too much into the discussion of which one is greater, especially because the cars changed so much, the championship format changed as well, so and the level of competition changing, it's hard to really say who is the greatest, but he is definitely one of the greatest of this era. I think you could easily say he's the greatest of the 2000 to 2019, even if you include the last 3 years where he hasn't done a whole lot. Just from the amount of championships in such a tight space of time. I mean, 2006 was his first championship. 2016, that's 10 years. He won 7 championships in 10 years. I mean, that is remarkably dense for a dominating era. I mean, if you look at it, Richard Petty had a lot of championships. Dale Earnhardt Sr. had a lot of championships. I don't think either one of neither one of them had it nearly as dense, which is my biggest reason for saying that I think Jimmie Johnson is at least still in consideration, because I've seen a lot of people saying, like, well, because it was the full point season format, that he shouldn't be considered that much of a up there with them. But I'd say him, Jeff Gordon, Dale Earnhardt Sr., and Richard Petty, I think you can make cases for all of them and David Pearson as contenders for greatest of all time. Just looking at stats of the current moment, I think you can make a compelling case for any one of those 5 that I just listed. But his legacy, though, will be remembered. I mean, I bet you 10, 15, 20 years down the road, we'll look at it and we'll still think of Jimmie Johnson and his dominating and his dominance in the 2010 in that 2006 to 2016 range. Now, I don't think we've got really a driver currently, except for maybe Kyle Busch, that can even come close to matching that. I mean, they're just none of the young drivers really kind of have that kind of sense about them, except for me, I think William Byron has a little bit of that sense, but of course, got to perform at a level to reach that goal, which of course, not necessarily the most, he hasn't had the most success to this point. So, I'd say, though, none of the current active drivers are going to be any kind of, basically deafening the impact, because I think that's another thing that really kind of helps Jimmie Johnson's legacy and is going to help it live on further, is that no one else really in this time frame. There were so many drivers that came in and did next to nothing, mainly because Johnson was winning all the races and all the championships, along with his teammate Jeff Gordon. So for his legacy, though, he will be remembered as one of the greatest of all time. Probably still going to be in the top 5 greatest of all time for several years to come. I mean, hard to say, because we could have some new young gun that we don't even know about yet that is going to suddenly burst onto the scene and do what Jimmie Johnson did. I mean, Jimmie Johnson was unheard of before he came in, and then his level of talent was unheard of once he got here. So, but yeah, that's kind of his legacy kind of wrapped up. But I'm now let's go through and talk about some of the candidates to replace him, though, at that 48 car. Well, 48 number pending. We don't know. They might change the number. There is going to be a press conference tomorrow with Rick Hendrick and Jimmie Johnson at around 4 o'clock. So I'll be watching that, and I might do a follow-up video based on that. But as of right now, I think the top contender, probably Larson, and I think that's probably the most positive outcome we could have for the entire sport. Because that would be a top young driver, Kyle Larson, getting a more competitive ride than he currently has, despite he currently has a pretty good ride. So that would be him getting a good ride. And then the vacancy at Chip Ganassi Racing would leave an opening for Ross Chastain to get his big break to get into the Cup Series, which he's been more than deserving of, I would say. Of course, missed out on the Truck Championship this year, but the fact that he was even contending for a championship in that series was amazing. But yeah, so I'd say Larson is probably the most positive and the most the most positive for NASCAR all around, and the most likely because he is very much on he is one of Jeff Gordon's favorite drivers, as well as one of Jeff Gordon's personal closest friends. So I'd say Larson's probably the closest one to getting that ride, and of course that would also mean that Kurt Busch gets to 100% retire on his own time, because the only development driver Chip Ganassi really has is Chastain, who would take over that 42 car at that point, and then they wouldn't have someone directly waiting and just itching for Kurt Busch to be out of the ride so that they could get a seat. So Kurt Busch could then retire on his own terms, kind of like what Jimmie Johnson's doing here. I don't believe that there's any forcing from Hendrick. I think this is a decision by Jimmie Johnson to decide when he's done. But yeah, so Larson, though, most likely, and probably the most positive for the sport. Chastain could get that ride. I've heard his name thrown out. I don't know, but I just think he's been so much of a pop. He's just kind of popped up so much since 2018 when he got the opportunity in the Xfinity Series. Like, his name had popped up a few times for some good finishes, and he'd always outperformed his equipment. But the fact that he's still got those ties to Ganassi tells me that he probably won't be going away from Ganassi, especially if Ganassi has the option to trade Larson to Hendrick to keep Chastain. Plus, when it comes to Chastain, it's like, yeah, he's had a really good run on momentum. I'm just concerned that run is going to stall out if he gets to a Cup car that isn't performing at its best. He's been known to outperform his equipment, but in the Cup field, especially in a Chevrolet Camaro, which, of course, is going to be getting an update in 2020, I just think that would be a bit too much of a jump for him to try and go from being in absolutely back of the pack equipment and trying to make stuff happen with it. Those cars usually cost less if there is damage to repair or replace than a Hendrick Motorsports Chevrolet will be. So I think that's a reason why Chastain wouldn't be a good pick for that seat, but I've heard his name thrown out around. Gragson just isn't developed enough yet. Of course, he could have a breakout season in 2020 in the Xfinity Series, of course, against lightened competition, because a lot of the top talent has left the series because they've been promoted to Cup rides. And to be honest, the Xfinity Series is really going to struggle for a few years, but that's a topic for another video. But yeah, so Gragson, I just think he's a bit too far behind on development right now to be ready for 2021 Cup without a massive breakout season. And then some of the other names I've heard kind of thrown around as kind of like fillers. I've heard Justin Haley. I think that's more just because of his Cup win that he got in the at Daytona earlier this year. Which, not to take anything away, but there are a lot of guys who win one Cup race and then don't do much, and I think that would be a bit too much of a limb to go out on, especially considering he has FOE sponsorship, and Ally has already signed on for 3 years post Jimmie Johnson. So I mean, they don't necessarily need his FOE, his Fraternal Order of Eagles. Man, try saying that 5 times fast, but yeah, they don't need the check from there. So I think he's gonna stay in Xfinity for a few more years. Plus, I think he needs the development time in Xfinity. Other drivers I could see potentially coming up and kind of doing a 1 or 2 year stay in the 48 to basically just try and carry it to when Gragson or someone else is more developed. I could see Mike Lynette or Justin Allgaier getting the call up. But again, those are more drivers that would be stepping in for a 1 or 2 season deal, basically waiting for Gragson to get the experience he needs to be ready to run full-time competitive Cup, which again, which I don't think that bringing in someone for just 1 or 2 seasons in that 48 car is a good idea. Even though I think Allgaier or Annette could go up and do okay in those cars, and that would be a veteran experience. Then some of the other drivers that have just kind of been thrown around are just kind of the general drivers, like, oh yeah, Ryan Truex. Well, he hasn't really done much he hasn't been able to find a full-time ride yet. Maybe if, say, an Allgaier or a Annette went full-time, maybe Ryan Truex could get a full-time ride in the in whichever junior motorsports car is vacated at that point. Which, I mean, I think that would be a pretty good option, but for the most part, though, I think it's probably going to be Larson. I mean, all the signs are kind of pointing that way. Of course, we could see a ball out of left field and see them pick up a Chase Briscoe or someone from Casey Kane's dirt team. And that's something else I wanted to mention about Larson is that, with him wanting to continue his dirt stuff and going to that team, potentially being able to team up with Casey Kane, former Hendrick Motorsports driver, and being able to team up with his dirt team potentially, which he's already said that he would be interested in having drivers run. Like, I think he mentioned like Chase Elliott running his dirt sprint car, so I think we could see a potential crossover for Larson to be able to kind of work with Casey Kane's dirt team, which is a competitive sprint car World of Outlaws team. So I think that would be a pretty good one as well, and yet another reason I think that Larson move would probably be the best option for the sport. But yeah, let me know what you guys think though. This is the end of the video. I'm just gonna we've got links down below in the description if you guys want to support the channel. Leave a like on the video if you guys enjoyed. Subscribe if you guys are new. But I'd really like to hear though what you guys' thoughts on this are, because I know there's going to be mixed opinions on the Jimmie Johnson and his retirement tour next year. So I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens from that, because of course we have no idea what's going to end up happening for next year, but we now know Jimmie Johnson will not be in that car past 2020. So thank you guys all for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Bye! You guys are still watching? I say goodbye. Well, if you guys are sticking around a little bit, I did a video right up here about Jimmie Johnson and his potential future, so if you guys want to see that, it was a video made about a month or two ago, so I'd be really appreciated if you guys would check that video out as well. So I'll see you guys in the next video.